So good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. So I'm in a way going to actually continue from where Jaan was left. And my major claim here is that for creativity you need some background knowledge, and this is exactly what Jaan said. And I'm going to actually show that you need at least two types of background knowledge. You need some frameworks and meta models, if you wish, but you also need stories, the narratives. About meta models, actually, I have visited Arvo Pärt Center near Tallinn, and a very interesting thing that actually I learned there from the guide and from actually going through some materials is that about how Arvo Pärt works. And it's not that, okay, let's sit down and, maybe a good tune comes, actually, so good new symphony. But he works actually in a very systematic manner, top down, actually, rather than bottom up. Actually, he has his models, meta models, and only then, actually, the new symphony is born, for example, or new like a choral piece or whatever. So, and that's why, actually, I emphasize that it's important actually to have some systematic background knowledge. And this is what my presentation is essentially is about. So, and I'm going to talk about the kind of background knowledge along or in two aspects. The first is the aspect of holistic design along the dimensions of function, form, and emotion. And the second is holistic design along human and technical dimensions. Okay, first then, holistic design along the dimensions of function, form, and emotion. So what is meant here? So this, I think you have all seen this picture. It's by Leonardo da Vinci. It's the Vitruvian Man. And actually, this event today was supposed to be the celebration of Leonardo da Vinci's birthday. But then it was transferred to Creativity Day, which is excellent. But the original idea actually was to celebrate his birthday. And the Vitruvian Man actually is an attempt to represent the proportions of a human body. And the name actually implies that looks like it's has been borrowed from another person, Vitruvius. Vitruvius was a Roman architect. And it is actually not necessarily true, because this figure here, this is by Leonardo, and it is claimed that Leonardo actually made his own measurements of men rather than actually borrowing those that were made by Vitruvius. So this is more original than is usually thought, and that's why maybe the name, the Vitruvian Man, is a bit misleading, but this is how this figure is known. But the Vitruvius, and I'm now actually going to the Vitruvius himself, was an architect, as I mentioned, who was also interested in the proportions of a human body. And Vitruvius actually was, maybe not among the first ones, but he proposed three elements of architecture. And architecture was mentioned also by my colleagues this morning, by Jaak, for example. And these elements are firmitas, in Latin, then standing for function, utilitas, standing for form or quality, and venustas, standing for emotion. And here, actually, the later people, like a German product designer, famous product designer, Hartmut Esslinger, has actually emphasized in the year 2013 the importance of emotion. And this has been done earlier also, but I like this saying by Hartmut Esslinger, form follows emotion, which says that actually emotion is much more important than is usually thought in architecture. In 2019, I actually had an opportunity to visit Taiwan as a part of the Estonian delegation, and we met a famous Taiwanese architect, Chris Yao, who is one of the so-called Zen architects. And it was very interesting actually to listen to his presentation, his explanations about how he creates his architectural pieces. And actually, he very much brought forward in the motion. So he actually emphasized that when you enter a building, then it's important what emotions it creates in you. And it's also equally important for people living in a building, or people working there, or people just walking there when we talk about some shopping center, for example. So this was in the center of the presentation by Chris Yao and the discussion we had with him. And these two photos actually, I think, exemplify it in the best possible manner. So you can, even looking at those photos, you can imagine actually what emotions would it create in you actually, would it construct in you. Standing there by the Water Moon Monastery, by Chris Yao was the architect of that unique building, which is in Taiwan. And you see the outside, all this actually how it has been designed, and inside. And even actually these photos alone actually, they, at least in me actually, they create certain emotions. And I'm actually, then you can imagine what it would be actually being there inside or outside of that building by that artificial lake, for example. So emotions are definitely important, and this has been recognized by architects. But not just by architects, but also by product designers. Buchanan, famous theoreticist, but also practitioner in product design, has emphasized or has brought out in 2001 3 dimensions of a product. And these 3 dimensions are, first of all, product has to be useful. This refers to some functionality. Then product has to be usable. This obviously refers to the quality. And product has to be desirable, which obviously is about the emotions that a product should evoke. And all in all, this is how the customer experience is created along these 3 dimensions. It has to be useful, has to be usable, has to be desirable. Customer experience or product experience. And now when we actually have a look at the history, where do these 3 elements actually come from? There's 3 elements actually that are there in the architecture, as I explained, and that are there in product design. So where do they come from? Then actually what we see is that, well, these 3 elements have been mentioned actually as far back as in ancient Egypt already. There is a hymn, the Exaltation of Inanna, that mentions these 3 elements as that are classically known in Latin as logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos standing for the function, ethos standing for the quality, and pathos standing for the emotion. Then Aristotle, a bit actually later on in his rhetoric, also talks about the same elements, logos, ethos, and pathos. Then we get to Vitruvius, that I already mentioned. Vitruvius was an architect who worked in the years 70 to 15 before Christ. And for him, these elements were, or he called them firmitas, standing for the function, utilitas, standing for the quality, and venustas, standing for the emotion. Then Sir Henry Wotton, 1568, who lived actually in 1568 until 1639. He was also an architect. And he used a bit different terms, but with the same meanings. Solidity, standing for the function, commodity, standing for the quality, and delight, standing for the emotion. Then Hartmut Esslinger, I already mentioned, in 2013, So he was an industrial designer, and he used quite well-known terms, function, form, and emotion. And now we come to requirements engineering, which is actually my field. And it's requirements engineering is a part of software engineering, dealing with actually how to understand what the customer wants and helping the customer to really understand what would be needed. And here actually we have traditionally, classically, the requirements have been divided into functional requirements. So what should be done? And non-functional requirements, which is about different like robustness and security and things like that. And for emotional aspect, there is a gap. Actually, traditional requirements engineering approaches, they don't actually touch upon the emotional aspect. Yes, sometimes they include it under the quality aspect, or under they include emotional requirements as a part of non-functional requirements, but this is not correct really. Fortunately, right now there is a lot of research work going on in the requirements engineering community in eliciting and representing emotional requirements, and my research group also is a part of these efforts. Then Steve Jobs, everyone knows the name. Steve Jobs Steve Jobs said that a product like iPhone, for example, should be useful, it's about function, should be empowering, which is about quality, and should be beautiful, which is about emotion. And finally, this approach where I have also been involved with my colleagues from Australia, but also from Estonia, motivational modeling. There are these different references to this approach, and this approach is used in interaction design and requirements engineering. And in our approach, we talk about functional goals, what should be done, about quality goals, how should it be, or what should be the quality characteristics of that artifact, and emotional goals. How should it feel? I mean, how should users, end users, or stakeholders feel about it? So this is the brief excursion in history. And now, well, here in this house, we're dealing a lot with software and software engineering, information systems engineering. And now I would like to actually propose maybe one of such frameworks that could be useful in the background, knowing about it for creativity, for enhancing creativity, about computer science students, for example. And the framework is actually very simple. So we're talking about functions. First of all, this is about the software product. A software product as a product owner, of course. And then, of course, it has to fulfill certain functions. Then there are software engineers who are about who need to actually design and implement these functions. Then it needs to have a certain quality characteristics. And quality actually, as quality is seen as a social phenomenon. So quality has a lot to do with the collective intentionality, and that's why social scientists should be involved here. And the third aspect, of course, is emotion. So how should end users and other stakeholders feel about a software product? And here we need artists. But also we need social scientists, because according to the newest theories of emotion, complex emotions are essentially social constructs that are constructed between different people through interactions. And that's why we need here also social scientists for dealing with emotion in software products, and we need also psychologists. This is something that is not represented here, but definitely psychologists should also be involved. So having this kind of framework actually helps creativity, is my claim here actually, that you know that what you should focus on really. And now the very brief part is a holistic design along human and technical dimensions. And here I'm going to Chinese philosophy a little bit. So I'm referring to the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi. from his works that were written 400 years before Christ. And he has written a very interesting story about cook or butcher Ding, who actually worked in the emperor's household. And the cooks, as you can see from this figure, and apologies to those who are actually vegetarians here, but this is about a little excursion to the history. So the cook Ding's main tool, of course, is his knife. And he uses to cut this, the killed ox. So he uses the knife. And now it's interesting how he does it. And maybe I will here actually give a word to him. According to Zhuang Qi, I will just read this. A good cook gets a new knife every year. He chops. Mediocre cook changes knives monthly. They hack. My knife now has 19 years on it. It has carved several thousand oxen, and the edge is as if I had just taken it from the sharpener. So what does it mean? Well, the way he actually cuts, cook Ding actually cuts an ox actually, is that, he's starting cutting, and then when he feels some pressure, he slows down considerably. And then he's trying to find some hollow, and then continues. And eventually, he's able to cut an ox without touching any bone at all. So because he's a real master in this field. And this is now similar, should be similar to how we deal with technology. Well, here, cook Ding and his knife form the socio-technical system, I claim. Human, cook Ding and his knife, and they work in harmony together. And I'm claiming that we need the same kind of relationship between a human on one hand and the software system on the other hand, so that using the system wouldn't be hacking, but it would be a natural collaboration between the two parties. So, and this is essentially the meaning of socio-technical systems. And that's the kind of narrative and story that is good to have in the background when you start when you start designing and developing information systems. So, and my final slide just shows some areas where these approaches, where these frameworks, both of them have been successfully applied and can be applied and will be further applied. So thank you for your attention.
Dear audience, do you have any questions? Here we are. And if somebody have a short question more, then show your hand.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. So I have a question about the kind of three aspects of architecture. I have seen kind of a classification that we have form, function, and goal instead of emotion. And my question is why should you use emotion instead of goal? And I'll explain it with an example. So let's take a system called, for example, a bookkeeping system. Let's say a form, in a sense, it's a bunch of code with a database on a cloud server, for example. That's what it is. A function is, for example, you can input purchase invoices, you can take out sales invoices, things you can do in a bookkeeping software. And the goal should be that you can kind of put in financial transactions of a company. And I would say a bookkeeping software shouldn't invoke some kind of emotion. It's a boring old system that every company has to do. They have to input invoices, basically. They have to get out reports for government. It's boring old thing, not evoking many emotions. So I would say this kind of classification of form, function, and goal is better. And now my question is, why did you use classification, form, function, and emotion?
Goal, you said goal, the third element.
Goal, yes.
Yeah. Well,
maybe I would say
yes.
Evoking emotion is
yes.
one subset of goal.
Yeah. Thank you, yes. Of course, it depends on the kind of system, but in our approach, actually, we are talking about functional goals, quality goals and emotional goals. So they are all goals. They are different kinds of goals. And actually, when you were referring to some like book accounting systems, for example, well, I think the user experience is important there as well, actually, because I mean, all of us have actually lots of experience with these systems for our everyday activities that just don't work, actually, and we have to hack them to make them to work, and this is what we don't want. So I think this has been underestimated. In Estonian e-government, this has been largely underestimated. How important is user experience and usability also in e-government services? So this is my brief answer.